Governor Little digging into his desk for something that doesn't usually see a lot of light of day, I guess. The proverbial red veto stamp. We call it proverbial because, well, it's not really a red stamp. But Little did sign his first veto of the year today. He denied a proposal to allow a group of 23 Idaho school administrators to collect incentive money that was meant to go to teachers. Little says the move doesn't mean he doesn't want to invest in education. And if that seems a bit contradictory, well, we'll let Joe Paris explain why and what it means.
The first veto of the year is in the books for Idaho Governor Brad Little.
He actually gave me the courtesy of calling me in and telling me yesterday that he was going to had a problem with the bill and why he was going to veto the bill.
Twin Falls Republican Representative Lance Clow sponsors the now vetoed legislation. Clow says his legislation is designed to get teacher incentive payments to administrators that recently transitioned from their roles as teachers. That incentive money is part of the Career Ladder, a program called Master Educator Premiums.
It was personal because I knew a couple of the teachers, knew one specifically that came to my attention and brought it to my attention about what I describe as more inequity in the way funding formulas work or how our compensation programs work.
The Master Educator Premiums were designed a few years ago to reward Idaho teachers who showed the highest levels of mastery in instructional techniques and impactful work in the classroom. Premiums were set for $4,000 a year for 3 years per teacher. To qualify, teachers needed to build portfolios to exhibit their work. The program FAQ fully acknowledges that creating that portfolio would take 20 to 40 hours per year for 3 years. Teachers who went down that path but later got promotions into administrative roles lost eligibility, despite the dozens and dozens of hours working towards the program.
But they're still helping the classrooms. Many of these assistant principals and principals, they end up being substitutes when there's a shortage. They're in the classrooms, they're helping all the time. They're working with kids, and I felt that was awfully close to the same idea of what a teacher was.
In his veto letter, Governor Little writes, quote, "Master Educator Premiums were intended to be an incentive to keep teachers in the classroom. By providing them to teachers who moved outside of teaching roles, this appears to be at odds with the original purpose of this program." He adds, quote, "I share the goal of ensuring all our educators are appropriately compensated and rewarded. A more appropriate way of doing that is focusing on pay and benefits." Governor Little encourages lawmakers to pass education budgets that he suggests in his State of the State. Stakeholders weighed in too, including Lane McAnally, president of the Idaho Education Association. He writes in a statement to KTVB that, quote, "Any opportunity to reward educators for their essential work, which this bill did, is always a step in the right direction. However, our members also wholeheartedly agree with the governor's reasoning in vetoing this legislation. Focusing on pay and benefits is the best way to ensure Idaho's educators are properly compensated for their importance to students, families, state, and society."
I understood his argument. I just thought mine was a better one. It is our taxpayers' money, and so it's a matter, I'm looking at it as an equity fairness thing, and the governor's looking at it to being fiscally responsible. And I don't know which one of us is right. We both think we are.
Representative Clow says he brought the legislation to reward educators who put in a lot of time to be a part of the program.
I've told teachers that retired and left and whatever, said, you don't qualify anymore. That we're paying money to help kids. At least these assistant principals and vice principals and principals, they're still helping the kids. And their skills and talents are still of value to the state.
The legislation passed the Idaho House 52-15 with 3 absent. It passed the Senate 32-3. Those numbers could be good news on a possible veto override vote, which would need 2/3 of both chambers. But Representative Clow says it is wait and see. Veto overrides can be rare.
Sometimes people are a little reluctant to override a veto, even if they voted for the legislation the first go round.
All right, Joe, we're talking like, tens of thousands of dollars to about 24 teachers across the state, which doesn't seem like a significant amount unless, of course, you were one of those to receive it. And based on what we heard, I can understand why he vetoed it. I mean, was this expected?
I think there was a lot of support in the Senate and the House. So I think there were people that were surprised today that this was vetoed. But the governor gave his explanation, and there's been some critics of the bill itself that said, this is for only 23 people. Maybe we could take this money and we could give it to other people and we could spread it out more fairly. Now, the converse to that, as you heard Representative Clow talk about, is that you have this group of 23 teachers who spent dozens and dozens of hours. And, the state said it should take 20 to 40 hours to put these portfolios together. Some teachers I spoke with in recent years said it took well beyond that.
Oh.
So there's teachers that worked really hard to be a part of this program, worked 40, 60 hours to get $4,000 for that year. They put that work in, but then they got a promotion to an administrator, so they were no longer eligible. Representative Clow was really just arguing for the fact that,
they deserve something.
They still deserve it. So in terms of a veto, though, he tells me that early next week, they're probably going to discuss it. The numbers are there. If you were to take all the votes yes that voted yes
Sure.
on the legislation and then take that for the 2/3, the numbers do work. But as you heard, sometimes lawmakers are reluctant to vote on an override.
A passing vote doesn't always necessarily mean a veto vote.
Correct.
All right. Thanks, Joe.